Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where it's about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Charmed. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we have Mel dealing with the whole baby thing. Obviously, she's trying to meditate and stuff like that, getting cravings. Obviously, it's like that's a lot to kind of get thrown at you because like you're not just like, oh, you're not just pregnant, you're like a couple months pregnant. So that's pretty crazy, especially later on. The conversation she has with Ruby is really interesting, where it's like, right, like my future self gave me this baby, and what if she doesn't come back to get it? That means I'm gonna be having this baby present day, which is gonna be weird because it's like you're having your future baby present day. It's kind of crazy. Would make you wonder, would that have any like temporal anomalies related to the baby? I mean, well, Mel has time-related powers, because I don't think that's a one-for-one, like, even with, like, Wyatt or Chris. I mean, because, well, Wyatt and Chris ended up getting their dad's white lighter abilities, but I don't think they got, I mean, they got the witch stuff, but I don't know if they got any of Piper's abilities from my knowledge. So I'm curious, like, I mean, would the temporal stuff, as well as the fact is that eventually Mel does get back her power. I'm curious because, like, technically that power's in her DNA, but now that she's got the newer powers, molecular manipulation, like, maybe that kind of overwrites that. I'm curious, like, because she was initially a time witch, does that mean her baby's more inclined to have the power, like, time abilities, or would that just be the like, abnormality of just, like, the time situation of being from the future but being born in the past? Like, you feel like that would have some temporal effect, but maybe not. I don't know. At the same time with all of this, we also have Macy and Harry getting adjusted to like running and stuff like that. He's like, oh, is that why it feels like my lungs are on fire? She's like, are you okay? He's like, no, I just think, because at first it's like she's worried because it's like, once again, it's that worry creeping in of like, she's never had to worry about Harry before, but now it's like a thing of like, right, anything could go wrong. Because she's even like, wait, we got to get you a social security card, health insurance. It's like, don't worry, the elders already took care of that. I guess like any time, like well, maybe it's a situation of like, right, because he did have like a regular like, and they never really covered it, but I guess when he was in his white lighter duties, they automatically gave him like a background and stuff like that in case he needs to become human again. Like pretend to be human just to kind of watch over like the charm ones or whatever, his duties as a white lighter. So, because if I remember correctly, like Leo was like the handyman before he got revealed to be a white lighter. So it might be just that type of thing of like, right, I'm going to be in your lives, and so I've got a background and everything already set up just for me to jump into that identity. I wonder, do they have multiple set up? Or was it just one in particular? I don't know. I'm curious. They didn't really go into that too much. But it's like, nah, that's already set, so you don't have to worry about it. And at the same time, Maggie's trying to use her powers to figure out whatever future Mel came from, and ultimately touching a picture of them together, which I think is very symbolic that that's what triggered the... especially because that becomes symbolic in the sense of, well, not just their sisterhood as the charm ones, but also... in the future, Mel had basically written on the back, sisters forever, no, family forever. So it's interesting that would be the thing that ended up triggering the vision. I mean, maybe that's why the sentimental value of it, and why, like, obviously why future Mel cherishes it so much. So Maggie sees kind of a terrible future and is like, right, we need to find out what's going on, what future Mel was escaping from. We can't bring our Mel along with the baby to the future, so Maggie and Macy decided to go on their own, which obviously Celeste has a well, first and foremost, I love the whole thing of like the moment like Macy and Harry came back inside. She's like, and Celeste is like, where have you been? I told you not to be running. Macy's like, well, I thought you didn't tell me you weren't supposed to be. He's like, it's fine. It's so sweet in a way because it's almost like he's getting like scolded by his mom and his significant other. It's actually kind of cute. It's just like, all right, follow me upstairs. All right, seems like you're normal. But then he starts giggling like crazy, and it's like, what? So basically, because he took Georgie's soul, like, it's coming from a child's soul, so it's still immature, so it's going to take a couple hours for it to, like, rapidly age. So at first, he's acting like a kid, which has got to be weird for Macy. He's like, oh, here's my boyfriend acting like a kid. Okay, right, we're on this mission, which Celeste is like, well, what about this, what about this, what about this? And it's like, no, we got it all covered, which is like, oh, that's interesting. She's like, well, what about, it's like, no, we got that. It's like, oh, she's like, wow, you guys actually did think, I mean, they've been at this for a while, and they know, like, right, we can't just jump into this blind, we got to come well prepared, and they did, so... Celeste activates the spell and they go back in time. I mean, not go back in time, go forward time 5 years in the future. And obviously find safe space in a ruined state, but it's not just that. They find all of Seattle like that. It's very similar to like this episode definitely gave me some like The Last of Us vibes. And so it's obviously trying to figure out what went wrong, how did safe space end up this way. It was really interesting too, like the how the temporal situation works. I think it's so fascinating. Spells and things of that nature still work. Spells and potions still work, but their natural powers as witches don't. Which I love the explanation for. It's like, because the version of yourselves that should be here in the present, that grow up to be there in the future, aren't there. So because of that, you don't actually have any abilities here. Which I'm also, well, because obviously you have to worry about paradoxes and stuff like that. That doesn't influence that. But because your bodies aren't here to exist in the future, that's why your powers don't technically translate. Because you're kind of, I think because you're kind of an anomaly existing outside of your own time frame. You're a little paradoxy a little bit, I guess. But that was just such an interesting explanation. I'm not doing a good enough job explaining it myself, but I thought that was such an interesting explanation on like why they don't have powers in the future. At least when it comes to like specifically their powers. But they run into none other than Abigail. It's like, interesting. She would be the only person you'd find. Because the question, we never got an answer because we didn't find out what happened to everybody. Because there's other people. Well, Jordan wasn't in Seattle at the time, so I guess that's something not to worry about. Harry never got an answer to that. But Abigail's like, yeah, like she was surprised to see Maggie because, oh, Maggie, you're dead. And the thing that kept bothering me the entire time, I'm like, we're talking about Mel. We know what happened to Maggie. What about Macy? We end up finding that answer. But I was like, I thought it was interesting how we never found out. And it was interesting. I guess Abigail just never got to that part of the story. Or maybe it's just like, maybe it was something she wasn't aware of. Maybe she's just like, Macy's somewhere, I guess. I don't know. It's just like Macy didn't even come up in conversation. I guess they were so focused on, we got to find Mel. Wait, we're finding out that Maggie's dead? Like, that just kind of took the focus away from any, like, potential questions about Harry. I mean, to be fair, they also shouldn't know too much about their future. I mean, granted, they're going to change things, but it is also the thing of, right, if you know too much about your future, it could ultimately lead you going down a completely different path. And there's a lot of stuff they need for their futures to go down a certain way. Like, say, for example, if future Mel came and got her baby, present day Mel would have to go down a path that would ultimately lead to her getting the baby. I'm getting so much in my own head, but it's actually kind of interesting because it makes me think a little bit of like Misfits. Because Misfits had kind of a similar thing in the final season. Very different circumstances. I'm not trying to compare apples to oranges, but it was like a different circumstance that just kind of got me thinking about that a little bit. But regardless, Abigail ended up killing Maggie. It's because she got infected. There's basically a plague that infected not only humans, not just demons, but also witches as well. It's like, once again, I would assume that kind of means everything in the magical world. Because you know, that's not something we haven't really dealt with at all. Well, I was about to say technically at all this season. I mean, all like the magical creatures that like kind of got caught and everything, that's about it. Cause I guess like when they bringing that up, I guess they're referencing the entire, like when they're bringing up demons and witches, it's kind of like a free for all for like all the magical world. It's just like the magical world like as a whole doesn't pop into this as much as like in the original show. Like they would constantly run into like, mythical, magical creatures like all the time because they'd come asking for help because, you're the drawn ones, like you're the go-to answers for a lot of stuff. But it's like, they've had like, I feel like season 1 is the most interaction they've had with like other magical creatures that weren't just like demons or witches. So I just thought that was interesting. Maybe they kind of decided to make that, I don't know. Maybe it's just a choice, or maybe it's just like, I'm trying to think, like they've never really had too many interactions over the course of the season. Like I said, other than like near the end of season 1 or periods throughout season 1, but still, just something crossing my mind. I could be misremembered, but I don't remember much this season at all, or even like aside from like the magical creatures getting caught last season. That was about it. That's the only real interactions they had with any like magical creatures outside, once again, demons, witches, white lighters, and all that. So, but yeah, regardless, so they end up getting attacked by a creature. They never see what it is. All they see is Abigail dead, and it's like, that's rough. And even at the end being like, wow, it's kind of rough seeing Abby dead. Because even Macy was shook by that because it's like, right, they're not besties, but it's still kind of like, oh wow, it's rough seeing someone you know killed. And the fact is, they went through the trouble of hiding the assailant's face, made me think like, oh, it's got to be someone they know. I figured it was going to be a twist. Wasn't who I thought it was. I thought that was going to be interesting. At the end, I started thinking like, well, they couldn't find Mel, that the creature itself was Mel, that she got infected somehow. Because ultimately they end up going back home to find all her research because there was a resistance kind of fighting against this. I don't know if Abigail was the last of it. Maybe Harry was a part of that, but we don't know who else might have been involved. But Nell was working on all these different, like potentially finding a cure. But when they get back to the house, they find her bored. I don't think she probably tried to find a cure at first, but couldn't. So she was probably actually trying to track down, okay, how do we... where's the source of it? Where's patient zero? Because this way we take it out. Maybe her plan was, all right, I got to go back and figure out where day one of this was, take care of the baby for now, and then I'm going to come back, tell you guys how to deal with it, and then it'll all be copacetic. Maybe that was the plan, because maybe by the time she dropped off the baby, because she couldn't find a cure at the time, maybe she went back as like, you know what, I'm going to try and work on finding patient zero, because they still never found out where Mel was, so who knows. Makes you wonder, they ultimately end up finding out the creature itself is Macy, which even she took that like heart to heart, being like, wait, I killed Abigail? Once again, not her biggest fan, but it still kind of shook her to know, like, right, I'm sure you're not all about taking someone's life. I think it's interesting, though, she was flinging fireballs, so I'm like, does that mean at some point in time Abigail was able to find a way to give her back her demon powers, or was that a byproduct of the play? Because essentially it's like it brings out the worst parts of you and brings them to the surface. That could just be a byproduct of she never technically got her powers back, but there's still a fraction of her, even though her demon powers were taken. I guess on some level maybe she's still a demon, or maybe that is supposed to represent she eventually got her demon side back and eventually got infected, and so the worst side of her demon side came to the forefront. I don't know. Makes you wonder what happened with like Maggie got infected, like what that looked like, They also, obviously, Maggie pieces it together. Well, because Macy had pointed out, based on the research and everything, it seems like from their present day, all of this started 3 weeks from then. So it's like we've got 3 weeks to figure this out before we go full-blown apocalypse level. And there's no means of stopping it because we don't have a cure for it. At least Mel never found one. So... But Maggie kind of pieces it together, right? The Perfecti, what they were warning about, this must be it. So I'm assuming this. It's like, right, it was it was a symbol from the Tomb of Chaos, so it was like something from the tomb that they never captured. I figured that's what it was going to be, but it seems like it might be the most deadly thing. It's like maybe they just never were able to track it down. You would think like, I mean, maybe there were other dangerous, super dangerous things too, and this just happened to be one of many super dangerous things. They got rid of most of them except for this one. Begs the question, makes you wonder, is this the last thing from the Tomb of Chaos? Did they lock everything else up? I mean, they couldn't let the Perfecti run rampant, especially when the Perfecti were all about, now we're going to kill you because you're in the way of order, you're part of chaos. So we have to wipe you out, even though you're like the greatest symbol of good in this world. That's the whole thing. That's their notion of being absolute about, right, protecting the order of everything, regardless. Which I do love that present day, there's so many moving parts. Obviously, you've got Harry at one point still childlike, having the earpiece in and wanting to talk to Macy and everything. And having Celeste scold him. Like I said, like playing definitely the mother role. Which, I mean, she is very motherly in more ways than one. Not just this circumstance, but obviously to the White Lighters and everything. Like, so, it makes sense. But I love the fact is that, like, she's scolding him and everything, but also, like, he goes from, like, kid to teenager at some point in time, and just Celeste being like, oh, you're in your teenage phase, because every time she asks him to do something, he's like, oh, fine, whatever. I'm like, oh, it reminds me of Groot going to baby Groot to teenage Groot. So it's interesting. And it's just like, oh, you're in your teenage phase, just kill me now. Like having to deal with him being so like sarcastic and stuff like that, and just like, okay, oh, you know how to use that device, and she's like, Could you turn it on from? How do you turn it on? It's like, okay, how do we get it to search out other, earbuds? And she's like, fine, whatever, I'll do it. It's like, oh, you're a snot-nosed teenager. Oh, you suck right now. So at the same time, there's also Mel and Ruby, which that's a little complicated because for Ruby, she's like, hey, so you're having a baby in the future, so begs other questions. What about us? And Mel doesn't say much, and a part of me was wondering, does Mel know about that stuff? But probably not, because Mel probably is like, all you need to know is take care of the baby. Other than that, you don't really need to know any other details. Not unless she does know, and it is a thing of, because last episode I brought this up that I thought like future Mel was going to tell her some stuff. It's like, right, you can't tell any of us, our siblings, you can't tell Ruby or anyone, because if you do, you potentially change the good aspects of our future. We need to keep things on certain trajectories in some regards and change them completely in others, So I was wondering if it was something like that, but it's also because Mel was worried about us being together right now, she's kind of like, no, go ahead. You want to go to a soccer game? Go ahead. She was kind of pushing Ruby away because it's like, right, it's a lot of responsibility. You never really asked to be a parent right now. I mean, maybe in general, but definitely not right now. And on top of that, you have me kind of becoming a parent right now. So it's a lot kind of getting thrown your way. So... But Ruby is saying, no matter what, the fact is, I've got your back. Don't be afraid. Don't be too stubborn and ask for help. So to help someone that she loves, she's willing to even do magic again, which even, because Mel was trying to keep her away from all this. Right, I don't want you mixed up in magic again, because obviously you made it clear you want to kind of stick away from it. But she activates a spell that kind of makes her move double speed, and they end up making a lot of the temporal potions that they need. But Ruby ends up passing out because she kind of overheats. Which, one of my nerdy brain immediately thinks kind of reminds me of Luffy's Gear Second from One Piece. If you've never watched One Piece or don't know what I'm talking about, it's a whole thing. Him burning up, overheating, just from moving to, just everything that goes on with his body. It just kind of reminded me a little bit of, what was happening to Ruby this episode. But what I thought was really fascinating was the moment it's okay, and they touch hands, and it's she ends up touching Ruby, and it's wait, there's no issues. And it's even I was wait, was it a byproduct of the potion that she used? Their thought process later on is that maybe it's the baby. Maybe that's also why future me gave me the baby, because she knew it would help us with the allergies. Because I was wondering, it's no, the baby can't have magical nullifying abilities to a certain extent. It can't, because Mel was able to still use her powers. So maybe it's just the baby, because at first I was could the baby potentially be the cure? Because her baby might, it can resolve the allergy. Maybe it can also help fight the whispering evil, as they call it, and so maybe that's also it. Which is, once again, it's interesting because it's we're once again the remixing of things, because it's right. Technically, this would be the Wyatt of the situation, but it also technically be the Chris of the situation, because you're coming back in time. Granted, it's not an older version. It's an actual still in the belly version. So, it's not going to be a one-for-one in certain regards of how this will play out. But I wonder, is it going to be, yes, it's a little Chris in the development of right, you're from the future and you're coming to the past. Once again, you're a baby, not a full-grown adult. But I wonder, is it going to be the Wyatt of things of you're a really special baby. I mean, for one, you're the child of a charmed one. So, a conversation I was also curious too was about the dad situation. I mean, maybe it's not important. Maybe it's just kind of maybe it's not important in that regard, or maybe it's just simply hey, it's I'm going to butcher the word, just insemination. Maybe it's just kind of went to a clinic and got pregnant type. I don't know. Maybe there's more to it. Maybe that has something to do with potentially her and Ruby. I mean, granted, she knows one future where Ruby grew old, had a family and everything, which I don't know if she ever told Ruby about that. Granted, that's not the future they live anymore, considering that's the future where Mel died, but they changed that, so. But obviously, in the future, Maggie and Macy are running from, her future evil counterpart who's trying to kill them, which part of me wonders, is that just the virus being let's kill anything in our paths? Or could it be... Well, because it's interesting, because if that Macy ends up killing this Macy, it will make it so that it never exists. So I don't, maybe there's a deeper reason why it's trying to kill them. Never went into that. It could just be like, oh, I'm trying to kill everything anyway. You just happen to be the closest targets, or maybe there's a very specific reason. Maybe it's trying to target the charm ones of like, right, I know, like whatever this virus is, maybe like patient zero is in a lot, maybe it's kind of like a hive mind kind of control of like, I've infected all of you. You're not just, it brings out the worst parts of you, but I also have control of you. Maybe not. I do love like the time stuff. It's so cool where it's like, right, Harry's going to hide the piece that they need to repair so that they can travel back to the present day. And it's like, right. It's like, oh, I'm going upstairs. It's like, no, we need you to go downstairs. So while they're running downstairs, he's going up the escalator, but he has to go back down. And he hides it in a piece of the wall that's open. It's like, well, behind which brick? And he carves it. And then in the future, the X automatically starts forming. It's like, oh, that's cool. So luckily, they were able to activate it and get out of there before future Macy could kill him. I was almost scared that she'd kind of pop through herself. But does not seem that to be the case. So in that moment, like, both Macy and Maggie found a way back, but they're older now. It's like, right, that's such a cool thing that, like, well, cool, scary, and it's just like, oh, we're old, and Mel's, like, really old. I even love the whole thing of that you can tell they're older, too, because they're struggling to get up. They're like, you know, which is ironic, because I guess in that moment, technically, well, I was about to say, I think even in that state, Macy's still younger than Harry, old man Harry, so I thought that was kind of neat. Which, speaking of Harry, him and Celeste, obviously, like, he talked mad crap to Celeste of like, oh yeah, you're only helping me out to ease your conscience, but obviously, like, she's kind of short of breath at one point in time because she's kind of having asthma. It's like, right, she's never gotten sick or gotten old before, so she's never had to worry about it, so this is all new to her. And Harry's kind of apologized because, like, right, I'm at like that 18 to 21 year old spot where I'm kind of feeling bad about some of the things I've done and said. So but for, you know, for Celeste, she points out the fact is she hasn't really allowed Harry to have the full human experience. Like, I've been kind of like the doting mother, like, trying to stop you. But it's like, no, like, I should let you live the human experience. And that is making mistakes and learning from them. So, like, I'm not going to be sticking around. Granted, goodbyes and everything aren't really my thing. I was almost hoping Harry would have hugged her. I would have loved that. Just being like, oh, because you're kind of like a mom to him in this moment. But it's like, right. She's like, I don't think I have to worry about you anymore because any future issues that might come up, you'll figure it out, because I don't need to kind of be like coddling you the entire way through. You need to kind of stumble your way through it. I mean, this is all part of becoming human, you know? So, I'm here when you need me and not when you don't, you know? So, I thought that was kind of great. But obviously it's a conversation about, right, this baby being the cure for their allergy and for whatever's to come. But also Ruby and Mel, you know, Ruby, like, for her, it's like, no matter what comes our way, you know, whether this baby comes now, comes later, like, the fact is, I'm in this all the way, you know, because she was like, if you told me some time ago, like, would I ever do magic again, she'd be like, hell no. But when it comes to the person that she loves, like, you know, it changes things, you know, love, kids, magic, all that kind of changed. So I thought that was kind of sweet, which is such a bummer, because, like, I'm the one that was always like, I kind of want Mel and Abigail together, which I'm like, I always feel bad in those type of situations, because I'm like, oh, I found the pairing I like and want, and it's just like, oh, this other pairing, it's like, oh, that's cool. I kind of want your heart to get broken, so you move, like, you know, it's like, no, I should be wishing for the, it's so weird, because certain relationships, like, it's like, oh, like, I want these particular relationships to work out, but they ultimately don't, and other people pair off. It, like, CW-wise, let's use an example, Stefan and Elena, which eventually becomes Damon and Elena and Steph and Caroline. Granted, that was a bumpy road. Even a Damon and Elena was a bumpy road. But it's kind of like that thing, like, right, you start off with, like, oh, this is in-game relationships, and then it turns out, oh, it's not in-game relationships, because the relationships end up changing. So it's kind of like that. But there's other relationships, and I'm like, oh, no, that's canon, and that's my relationship. I'm backing all the way. Like, the show is pushing for it, and I'm pushing for it. So sometimes I'm in sync with a show about relationships between characters, and other times I kind of miss the mark a little bit, because I'm like, oh, but what about this? Because I think Abigail and Mel would be such an interesting couple that's what I'm all about. But who knows? Like I said, Still a lot of unanswered questions about, what this particular thing is that created the Whispering Evil, where future Mel ended up, where's future Harry and everything, So they did bring up, like, looking at the board, it's like, obviously there was only like a handful of lights left. I mean, they never checked the demon side, they were just checking the witch side of things, but still, there was very few witches left in the world, probably very few people in general, so... Kind of, in actuality, it kind of reminded me a little bit of spoilers. I think it's kind of a similar vein of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, Part 3. Like, the finale for that, it kind of reminded me in that regard. So, maybe kind of dealing with something, well, maybe not just in that regard, but like, as in Part 4 as well, like the whole Eldritch terrors type of thing as well. Maybe something kind of that nature is what we're kind of dealing with here. We'll ultimately have to wait and see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.